All right, let's get started. Today's lecture 12, and we are going to probably wrap up our discussion of the economics of HIV/AIDS today, or get very close to it, before moving on to the next topic, investing in human capital. Because we haven't gone through all the material I want to, as well as some of the section material, I'm going to actually pass out problem set 2 on Tuesday. It'll still be due a week later. So hopefully that works out. I think for a couple of you, the scheduling will be a little better. And then, hey, believe it or not, before you know it, it's going to be the midterm. So that's pretty soon. OK, any questions before I get started? Questions, comments? All right, so let's get back into the model of safe sex that we were talking about last time in the context of why does HIV/AIDS, why does HIV continue to spread in Africa, and trying to kind of understand some of the behavioral underpinnings of unsafe sex. This is a slide we got to last time where we talk about the kind of trade-off between any benefits of unsafe sex and then the costs of unsafe sex. And the very simple way we parameterized it last time, I'm not going to go through these because we did that last time, but you're trading off any benefits of unsafe sex versus the cost in terms of reduced life expectancy, basically, the risk of dying. So that's the simple trade-off. Right at the end of class last time, you guys made some interesting comments and points about useful extensions. So we're going to have two extensions we'll get to next. Extension 1 will extend the model into to introduce different information, sort of different uncertainty about people's own infection status. So they won't have necessarily great information about their own infection status on the one hand. And then the second extension will extend the model to look at different preferences where we incorporate altruistic preferences. In other words, preferences where you care not just about yourself, but about others. Okay, so this is extension 1. Imagine in period 1, people believe there's some likelihood, R, that they're already HIV positive. So, remember when we talked about the model last time, we imagined you sort of enter adulthood and you make this decision about sort of, what type of, sexual activity you'll have in your life. We have lots of unsafe sex or no unsafe sex. But here we're going to think of it like we're going to move a little closer to something sequential and imagine you've already made some choices in the past that lead you to believe you have some risk of infection R. Then moving forward, what should your behavior look like? So you can go through and see that the expected utility of safe sex now has changed. Instead of knowing I'm going to live to old age with probability P, R enters in this expected utility formulation. And how does it enter in? Well, probability R, I'm already infected. So the likelihood that I'm going to live to old age is already PHIV, which is less than P. And then with probability 1 minus R, I'm uninfected, I'm having safe sex, so I live to old age with probability P, just as before. So this is one way to extend the model to the case where people really just don't know where they stand. And this is really important, and it's going to tie directly into like the Thornton article that's on your reading list, because that's all about people basically finding out about their own infection status. Yeah. No, so R is somewhere in that interval of 0 to 1. So it could be 0, and 0 is the case we had before, where I know I'm uninfected. It could be 1, which is I know I'm infected, or it could be anything in between here. And in fact, you could very easily imagine an extension of this model where we have a different R for each person. So each person I would have an R sub I, which would be their own belief about their infection status, and then there would be their actual infection status. Those are two different variables that would be individual specific. So you might imagine very easily extending this model to that case and thinking through behavior. We will do a brief extension. In extension 2, we'll talk about individual specific parameters briefly, but that's something you guys should keep in mind that could come on a problem set or something like that. Okay, expected utility of safe sex. We have this new term. The expected utility of unsafe sex hasn't changed because we've assumed if you decide to have unsafe sex, you're going to get infected in this model. And then you live to old age with probability PHIV. So if we take the difference again between the expected utility of unsafe sex and safe sex, just as we did before, it looks kind of similar. We still have this benefit term, S, that we had before, but now the cost term has changed. So instead of the cost term just being V times the difference between the probability of living to old age in these two states of the world, it's that same expression multiplied by 1 minus R. Okay, so in the case where R is 0, so the case we did before is just a special case of this model with R equals 0. Then it boils down to the same expression we had before. When R equals 1, then we're in a world where we know we're infected. And in this model, there's no reason not to have unsafe sex in that situation because the only thing holding you back from having unsafe sex is the risk of dying. And we'll extend that. We'll look at altruism in a second. But for now, people are totally selfish. So perfect economic agents. Okay, any comments or questions or thoughts on this setup? Okay, so what are we going to call this effect as R rises? As R rises, we're going to call this the nothing to lose effect. In other words, the cost is lower because I may already be infected, so I've got nothing to lose at this point. I'm already infected, or I'm probably infected. Might as well have unsafe sex. There is actually some evidence. There's a former PhD student here. I may have written his name on the board. I forget. Eric Gong. I think I mentioned him, who wrote his dissertation on exactly this question using some data from Kenya and Tanzania that actually finds some evidence for this. Find some evidence that when people find out they're infected, they have more unsafe sex. And that's it's a small population. It's data from like 15 years ago. We don't know how much it generalizes, but there's some notion that maybe there's something to this. Yeah. Yeah, we're still in the two-period world, although implicitly here there's some earlier period that led you to have a belief that R may not be 0. So this is I'm kind of bringing in additional periods and making this more of a sort of allowing you to update a little bit more by bringing in R without explicitly modeling an earlier period. It's a way to kind of sneak in some more dynamics into the model. Yeah. The cost of unsafe sex? Yeah, so if they know, you're exactly right. If R equals 1, so you know you're infected, then the cost term goes to 0. And we know S is greater than 0. So yeah, in this model, if you know you're infected, you're going to have unsafe sex. Just because there's, you're only not having unsafe sex before to avoid infection. It could be, because there are different strains of the virus, and certain drug cocktails may work a little better or worse against different strains. So even though you are infected, if you keep having unprotected sex and you keep getting infected maybe with different strains of HIV, it could be bad for you. Yeah. You could get other STIs, so this model kind of abstracts away from that. And says like if you're infected, you're infected. In reality, it could still be bad for you to keep getting infected, but obviously the kind of magnitude of that is probably much less than the magnitude of going from uninfected to infected with HIV. So we kind of abstract away from those other issues. Yeah. Why is there what? In safe sex? Okay, so this first V term is in the first period, T equals 1, and then the second term is T equals 2. So that's kind of where it comes from. There was another hand. Did you have your hand up? Did you have your hand up? No? Yeah, you didn't? Okay. Great. What's that? T is a time period 1 and then time period 2. Yeah. Okay, so this is, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, there is. So the T1 unsafe sex is actually this one right here. I just didn't go through the algebra. I can go back to this previous slide. So in the kind of previous slide, I kind of laid it out a little more clearly. So for unsafe sex, this was your utility in the first period, life plus the benefits of unsafe sex, and then but that kind of just turns into this. So yeah, I just kind of skipped some steps in that second one. Okay, so what are the implications for public health messages? I think this is pretty important to think about. A lot of people's intuition about what different public health messages will do are not based as much on a model as more on intuition. So one thing that's kind of interesting is a public health message that tries to really scare people. There's tons of HIV out there. If you have unsafe sex, you're really going to get infected. It's really dangerous. It's going to convince a lot of people who've had unsafe sex, like, wow, I'm infected. I had unsafe sex at one time 3 years ago, but they say on all those billboards, it's so dangerous, I'm definitely infected. Whereas in reality, your likelihood of being infected from that one time are like minuscule. So certain types of public health messages could raise R, and depending on the model you have in mind, we're going to talk about an extension of the model where you get different results. That could actually lead people to be riskier. So everybody's intuition is like, let's scare people and tell them it's really bad so they don't have more unsafe sex. But in this case, it could backfire. It could backfire because then people might just say, oh, I'm already infected. And I'll show you some of the data from Thornton if we get to it. And I think it was table 10 in her paper. Hopefully we'll get to it at the end of the lecture today. People at baseline in Malawi, in her sample, okay, infection was 6%. HIV infection was 6%. 40-something% of people thought it was likely they were infected. That's just totally out of whack with reality. But if there's any of these nothing to lose effects, that's like a really dangerous reality to be in. Because then people might just start being really reckless, fatalistic, thinking like, I'm already infected, and maybe they'll take more risks. So that's one insight from this model. The other insight is, what happens once we boost ARV treatment? Now, ARV treatment is incredibly important. Without ARV treatment, without the expansion of ARVs in the last decade, millions of people would have died. ARV treatment has been the best thing to fight the HIV/AIDS epidemic we've had because it's keeping people alive. There's no doubt about it. But there is something to keep in mind with ARV treatment, which is it's going to increase the PHIV term. In other words, even if I become infected, I'm going to be much more likely to live to old age once there are ARVs. So we shouldn't be surprised if, with the expansion of ARVs, we start seeing more risk-taking behavior. And there's plenty of evidence in the US that there were some dynamics like this once ARVs got rolled out, that some of the very strong safe sex messages and practices stopped being followed as much. And there's some evidence from another one of our former PhD students, Willa Friedman, who graduated last year. Eric Gahn graduated 2 years ago. Willa finds evidence in East African data that as ARVs expand across local clinics after 2003, in the areas near those clinics where ARVs are available, more people are having unsafe sex. So that doesn't mean ARVs are bad. ARVs are fantastic, and they've saved millions of lives, but we have to understand that it might change the dynamics of the epidemic once ARVs are available. In other words, once AIDS is a treatable disease, a treatable chronic disease, rather than a death sentence, people are going to take fewer precautions to avoid it, like they would with any disease, like anybody would. Okay, let me pause for a second. What are any other implications that come out of the simple addition of this R term and the model so far that you can think of? And then we're going to do more extensions. Okay, so in both of these cases, very seemingly attractive and probably quite attractive public health policies would increase unsafe sex, so maybe surprisingly. Okay, extension number two. Extension number two is one that I think everybody comes to right away, which is the possibility that people, or at least some people, are altruistic. In other words, people care about what happens to others. So imagine the following. Not only do I care about the benefits to me in that moment of unsafe sex, but I worry about the implications for my partner. And in particular, if I believe I'm more likely to be infected, those benefits fall. In other words, I feel guilty, I feel bad, I feel miserable thinking I may be infecting somebody else. So that S term is going to fall as R rises. In other words, S is declining in R. That seems plausible for many people or most people. So to be concrete, imagine a very simple functional form where S is just some constant S naught times 1 minus R. And this is just, we can pick that functional form just because the algebra is really simple. In other words, when R is 0, I know I'm not infected. I'm kind of back in the world we were in before. There's just some constant benefit of unsafe sex. As R rises to 1, maybe the benefit of unsafe sex falls to 0 for me. Or it could be negative. I mean, you could imagine many different functional forms here. This is just one very simple one. If we go through the calculation of what the difference between the expected utility of unsafe sex and safe sex is, instead of having an S term here, we have this new S naught times 1 minus R. And in this case, this very simple linear cost function, we get the expression at the bottom. What does that expression look like? How will decision making in this case look like compared to our initial simple model? Will there be more unsafe sex, less unsafe sex, the same amount of unsafe sex? So some people say less. How many people say more? Should I click a question? It's not too late. I can. How many people say less? Just let's raise hands. How many people say less? Okay, less unsafe sex. And remember, I'm thinking relative to our initial case, the simple model. How many people think there'll be more? How many people think it'll be the same? Okay. So the expression before looked like this. So let me ask again. Let's just assume this is some constant S naught. That's the same constant. Is there going to be less, more, or the same amount of unsafe sex in this case relative to the simple model? How many people say the same? Okay, so it's got to be the same because it's just the exact same expression times a constant greater than or equal to 0. So if this one here, sorry, my pen isn't working on the side. If this expression here is greater than 0, then that expression times a constant will be greater than 0, right? So it turns out with this simple linear form, that's why I chose it, the nothing to lose effect and the altruism effect cancel. Now that's just a quirk of that functional form. That's not sort of a general result. You can imagine functional forms where the altruism effect is more important or the nothing to lose effect is more important. It really just depends on how steeply the benefits of unsafe sex decline with R, with my belief about my infection status. Okay, so for instance, in this case, altruism would dominate because the benefits of unsafe sex are going to be falling more rapidly. A lot of people look puzzled. Should we go back to the previous slide about why it's the same? Yeah, go ahead.
So why is it if the difference between the expected values decreases, then the problem is it deterministic such that if the value is greater, they will always have.
Yeah.
They will always engage in unsafe sex?
This is like totally deterministic. Everybody's the same. In a minute, I'm going to talk about a very natural extension where different people have different benefits of unsafe sex. And in that case, this finding won't hold. But here, it's either everybody's going to have safe or unsafe sex. So all we care about is this inequality. And this inequality times a constant is going to kind of give us the same insight. But you're totally right that once we have heterogeneity, shrinking that difference or changing that difference might lead to some different perspectives potentially, more generally. But although actually with this linear functional form, even if there was some heterogeneity here, multiplying it by a constant would lead to the same result. But the intuition is right of what you're saying. Not exactly this functional form. Okay. So those are two extensions. What is this model missing? This model is potentially missing a lot of things. One very important one in a lot of settings is that not all sexual choices are voluntary. So we model this as people go out and they're optimizing and they're thinking about their future, should I have unsafe sex, safe sex, etc. To the extent that some people are coerced into having unsafe sex, then this model isn't going to tell us about those decisions, because those aren't decisions, right? So that's one very important limitation. We're giving individuals a lot of agency, a lot of control over their sexual behavior, which is sometimes right, but not always right. So that's a big limitation that we have to keep in mind, especially in settings where there is a lot of sexual violence, domestic violence, etc. Okay, that's one limitation. A second limitation has to do with the fact that in the background behind a lot of sexual relationships are, and this is true in every society, it's true in the US as well, there's social norms and cultural norms about what is appropriate behavior, what is not appropriate behavior, and we can incorporate those things into the model as thinking them as different costs and benefits of different actions, but we haven't really fully specified those here. So this is like a very stripped down version of decision making that's kind of taken the decision out of its context. So for instance, one practice, one social norm, cultural practice in the parts of Western Kenya where I work that affect the transmission of HIV, but isn't really captured in a model like this, is what's called wife inheritance. So the practice of wife inheritance is a traditional practice in Western Kenya, which states that if a woman's husband dies, she's inherited by his brother. You might say, wow, that sounds awful. But in a context where a few women in the past had labor market opportunities, at least it provided some security for her and her kids, that someone in the family would continue to sort of include her in their kin group, rather than basically kicking her out to the street. That was the kind of probably traditional social insurance motivation of it. In the context of HIV, you can imagine how this would lead to the spread of the disease within families in really devastating ways. So imagine if this woman's husband dies from AIDS. She may be much more likely than to be infected herself. She marries his brother, infects him, and maybe his other wife or wives. So you might have whole families sort of decimated by this practice. So that's a relationship choice that isn't driven by these kinds of calculations. It's really driven by a traditional norm that may be hard to change. Can people think of any other social or cultural norms that might be relevant here? Yeah. That's right. So another reason why you might choose to have safe sex or unsafe sex, of course, is pregnancy. And that's kind of lurking in the background here. What we haven't put in the model at all is you mentioned unwanted pregnancy, but a lot of people are having unsafe sex because they want to have kids. And so that's introducing risk into their lives, but there's a benefit that, you could think of it in the model. If we go back to the model and we say, what are the benefits of unsafe sex? It's S. Well, one of the benefits of unsafe sex, if you want to have a kid, is a kid, or one of the potential benefits. So, again, S could be very heterogeneous here. If you don't want to have a kid, unsafe sex becomes less attractive than if you do. And the whole sort of pregnancy issues in the background here, we haven't really talked about it. So that's a real limitation. Okay. What are some other practices? Yeah. And that's a practice that's gotten a lot of attention, I think, especially in Southern Africa. And again, that has nothing to do with the model. It probably ties very closely into point one up here, at least in some cases, although not in all. But again, decisions are being made for reasons way outside of this model in that case. Okay. Some other things the model is missing is, even though overall people tend to know the causes of HIV/AIDS, there might still be certain pockets of poor information or certain types of information that aren't well understood, and that again could lead to mistakes in decision making. So yes, people know that unsafe sex could lead to HIV/AIDS, but people, as we mentioned, tend to really overestimate the risk of being infected from any one episode of unprotected sex. So there's information about the broad patterns, but on a lot of specifics, there's poor information. So there could be mistakes in decision making due to that. Okay. Any other thoughts about what this sort of model or this sort of framework is missing? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. All contraception is going to have some error rate, and to the extent that there's more errors or more problems, then the decision becomes more difficult in some sense. So having safe sex may not guarantee that you remain uninfected. We're kind of back in that world with R. Even if I choose to basically live a life of safe sex, there's some risk I'm going to get infected anyway. And if that's true, actually, that extension one could be related to what you're saying. If it's true that I'm going to get infected anyway, even if I try to be safe, well, I might as well just be unsafe. Yeah, welcome. Yeah. Exactly. And so, we can incorporate that into the model as the sort of the negative of the benefits of unsafe sex, like, the cost of safe versus unsafe sex. But that's right. Maybe for some people that's prohibitive. Maybe they live far away from a shop with condoms, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of things the model's missing, but at the same time, it's giving us a couple of interesting predictions, and some of these are going to be basically taken to the data in the Thornton piece. But if you're interested in this broader area, Eric Gong's work and Willa Friedman's work is definitely worth reading, because it's right on this issue of decision making and what happens when people learn about their status. Okay, so now that we have some sense of the model, let's talk about what public policy could or should do, and go through a couple different policy options and try to bring them into the model in some way. So one idea that's gotten some attention, there's a number of studies on this. One is this Duvall et al. Study from a couple years ago that I'm one of like 20 co-authors on, is the following. If individuals are incentivized to remain STI negative, will they basically engage in less risky sexual behavior? So there's been this broad movement in development across different sectors, and we'll talk about some of these projects in the coming weeks, to what are called basically conditional cash transfer programs. So they're government programs that provide poor households with money conditional on some sort of health behavior, conditional on getting their kids enrolled in school, conditional on getting their kids vaccinated, et cetera. What if we extend that same logic here and just sporadically test some high-risk youth and say, hey, if you come in, in this case, it was every 4 months, and get tested and you're STI negative, you'll get some money.